There I was, standing at the edge of what used to be a mountain dam, now nothing but a roaring, unstoppable flood tearing through the brand new homes the HOA had illegally built on my land. That was me, caught in the middle of a battle over what was rightfully mine. It all began when they thought they could steal what my grandfather had left behind. When he passed away, I never imagined his greatest gift would turn into a battlefield. He left me his land, a sprawling piece of the old country, open fields, dense woods thick enough to lose yourself in, and at the heart of it all, a mountain dam he personally designed and built after surviving one of the worst floods this area had ever seen. The dam wasn't just a structure, it was a wall of stone and stubbornness, an inheritance of wisdom and defiance handed down through bloodlines. The will was clear, signed and witnessed: the land, the water rights, and everything touching the soil belonged to me, free and clear. For a while, life was peaceful. I worked in town and spent weekends fixing fences, walking the dam's crest, watching the seasons turn over the mountains. Trouble came quietly, at first, a crisp white letter with a gold-embossed logo I didn't recognize. Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, it said. My land, supposedly protected by grandfather's zoning battles decades earlier, was now suddenly subject to community review under new county maps approved at the last municipal session. At the next town meeting, a slick, smiling man with perfect hair unveiled brightly colored maps showing the expansion of Willow Ridge. There, in heavy blue ink, was my land, folded into their new development plan like it had never belonged to anyone. I stood, furious, demanding answers, only to meet Karen Langford, the HOA president, self-proclaimed visionary and a living embodiment of menace. With a tilt of her head and feigned confusion, she assured me it was all perfectly legal, a simple clerical error, a survey mistake easily fixed. But I left that meeting with a gnawing dread growing in my gut. In the weeks that followed, surveyors trampled my fields without so much as a knock, wooden stakes with neon flags popping up like invasive weeds. Heavy machinery rolled in, bulldozers carving roads through pastures where my grandfather taught me to ride horses. Foundations were poured fast and sloppy, and before I could catch my breath, the HOA had greenlit 58 luxury craftsman-style homes right on top of my land. I fought back, hired a local lawyer, a good man, honest and sharp, but even he seemed nervous when he saw the names on the paperwork. County clerks dodged me, property officers lost my complaints, and Karen smiled sweetly each time I protested. Her board members nodded like well-trained dogs, painting me as the stubborn holdout clinging to dusty deeds and outdated maps. At a second town meeting, Karen suggested with faux sympathy that I accept one of their generous buyout offers before progress left me behind. I stood up and declared loudly that I would never sell what my family built, not for any price. That was the moment everything shifted from bureaucratic theft to open hostility. Violation notices began appearing on my truck, fines for imaginary code breaches stacking up like unpaid bills. I woke one morning to find a sign staked into my yard declaring it a development zone, no trespassing. Even the sheriff's deputies shrugged when I called, saying it was a civil matter. Doors slammed shut in my face, and Karen wasn't just playing hardball, she was dealing loaded dice. From a sympathetic clerk at the county recorder's office, I learned Willow Ridge had been donating heavily to council members' campaigns, buying inspection waivers, zoning exceptions. Smiling photos and handshake deals papered over everything. I was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outvoted. Every legal protest I filed was met with countersuit threats from the HOA's lawyers, accusing me of harassment for disputing new boundaries. I knew I couldn't beat them head-on, not yet. So, I pretended to give up. I stopped attending meetings, let the flags stay in my fields, nodded politely when Karen waved from her brand new Range Rover with a blindingly fake smile. While they celebrated breaking ground and selling lots like conquering heroes, I documented every move. I took pictures of every construction violation, every environmental impact ignored, every bulldozed tree and ripped fence post. I recorded every conversation, saved every letter, and copied every shady zoning approval I could find late at night from public archives. I built a quiet case, a fortress of proof stacked in boxes in my grandfather's old workshop under the dam. I made no sound, lifted no finger to stop them, and watched as they poured hundreds of thousands into infrastructure they didn't understand. They laid water lines across unstable soil, built McMansions over old flood basins without geological surveys. They thought I was beaten, that the land would bow to their blueprints. But some things, old country land, bloodlines that guard it, don't break just because you scribble over them with ink and concrete. Paper means nothing when the rain starts to fall and the mountain starts to roar. They had stolen my fields, my woods, my dam, declaring war without even understanding the battlefield. Deep down, I knew a reckoning was coming, inevitable as gravity and twice as unforgiving. I just had to wait for the first storm. The dam had always been the silent guardian of the valley, a thick slab of stone and packed earth, built with stubborn hands, hard labor, and the grim memory of disaster burned into the town's bones. 80 years ago, before the land was parceled and sold, before asphalt sliced the mountains into neat grids, there had been a biblical flood that didn't just wash away houses but wiped entire families off the map. My grandfather was a young man then, hauling sandbags alongside neighbors, trying to hold back a wall of mud and water that cared nothing for deeds or fences or dreams. They failed, and the valley drowned. When the waters finally retreated, only shattered homes, ruined fields, and headstones remained where life once thrived. My grandfather swore it would never happen again. Though not an engineer by training, his stubbornness counted for more. Over years, not months, he and the other survivors built a dam into the mountainside, one stone at a time. It wasn't a high-tech concrete monstrosity but old-world engineering, a massive buttress of earth, rock, timber, and faith, designed to hold back the mountain's wrath when the skies opened. For decades, while neighboring counties suffered landslides and seasonal floods, our valley stayed dry. Grandfather's dam absorbed the mountain's tantrums, catching rain runoff and channeling it slowly into the lowland creeks. Over time, the emergency it was built to prevent faded from memory. People forgot why the dam was there, but the land never forgot. Water always remembers its path. When the HOA came with their glittering plans and tidy blueprints, they never paused to consider the dam. To them, it was just an ugly bump to flatten for easier development. They paved over drainage channels, rerouted creeks, and bulldozed swaths of the old floodplain for cul-de-sacs and ornamental fountains. The crowning insult came when I watched from behind a line of old trees as a backhoe operator in a neon vest gouged into the outer shoulder of the dam, not deeply enough to cause immediate collapse, but enough to threaten its stability. The silent guardian was being undone, piece by piece. The damage to the dam wasn't immediate but deliberate, a tear in its shoulder that would fester with the first heavy rains. I wanted to scream, to rush down the hill and throw my body between the machines and the bones of my grandfather's work. But I didn't. Instead, I clenched my fists so hard my nails bit into my palms and stayed hidden, because by then I understood something crucial: they didn't just disrespect the land, they didn't even understand it. In their minds, they had already won. They had the legal papers, the smug signatures, the politicians in their pockets. To them, I was just a ghost of the old world, clutching memories no one cared about. They had no idea that their glittering suburb was a ticking time bomb of their own making. Every broken stone, every severed route, every blocked runoff channel was quietly, patiently counting down to the moment when the mountains would take back what was owed. They thought they had beaten me. They didn't realize they were living on borrowed time. So, I began preparing in the only way I could. I stopped visiting the dam openly. I stopped patching minor leaks after storms. I stopped clearing intake channels that kept pressure from building behind the wall. I let debris gather, silt accumulate, the natural forces simmered just beneath the surface. I became invisible to them, a forgotten relic wandering the woods while they held barbecues on half-cured concrete patios and installed solar lights along streets that wouldn't exist in 6 months. When the fall rains came early that year, I watched from my porch, sipping coffee as puddles formed on freshly sawed lawns. When winter melted into a soggy, chaotic spring, I took slow, quiet walks along the dam's edge, noting how cracks widened with every cold snap, how the ground sagged slightly where the backhoe had gouged the shoulder. I didn't cause the dam to fail, that would have been criminal, I simply stopped protecting it. I let nature take its course. I let the laws of physics and hydrology, laws far older and far more ruthless than any HOA charter, do what they were always going to do once the arrogant little empire of Willow Ridge decided it knew better than the mountain. The irony was that all their expensive construction work only accelerated the inevitable. Their storm drains choked with debris, manicured lawns sloughed topsoil into clogged retention ponds. They rerouted natural waterways without understanding the mountain didn't care about property lines or homeowners associations, it cared only about gravity, water pressure, and the simple truth that water always finds a way. The first few heavy storms were warning shots, tests. Minor sinkholes opened in unfinished sections of the development. The HOA blamed unseasonal rain patterns and ordered more fill dirt, more quick fixes. They held meetings about environmental stabilization, charging new homeowners special assessments to cover costs, all while ignoring the thick tension in the ground beneath their feet. I watched with patient, reverent silence. I kept to myself, tending the few scraps of land they hadn't bulldozed yet. When I bumped into Karen at the gas station, I made polite conversation, listened to her smug updates about Willow Ridge's success, smiled and said nothing about the fractures running through the bedrock below her feet. It was no longer about revenge. It was about balance, honoring the land, my grandfather's work, and the old truth that arrogance always gets paid back with interest. They had tampered with a sleeping giant, and I didn't have to lift a finger to awaken it. All I had to do was step back, let the dam rest in its wounded, exhausted state, and wait. The rainy season was coming, and this year, it wasn't going to be kind. The first storm rolled in like a slow drumbeat, low and steady, pounding the mountains until the rocks themselves seemed to hum with tension. I sat on the covered porch of my grandfather's old house, a battered thermos of coffee in my hands, watching the gray wall of rain crawl across the valley like a living thing. The mountains vanished behind a curtain of mist, and far off, I heard the low rattling groan of distant thunder. In the subdivision below, the shiny, smug heart of Willow Ridge flickered on, porch lights blinking little squares of yellow against the gloom. I knew the land better than any of them. I knew how the clay would swell with rain, how the shallow topsoil they'd foolishly planted over would slough and crack when water found its ancient channels again. Deep in my bones, I knew the wounded and neglected dam would not save them this time. As rain poured hour after hour, I slipped on my old work boots and wandered the perimeter of what had once been my fields, a quilt of half-finished homes and freshly paved streets. Even in the downpour, I could see it happening, long jagged fissures opening in sidewalks, spiderweb cracks forming along foundations of houses not yet occupied. Water pooled where no drains had been installed, creating shallow lakes in cul-de-sacs and seeping slowly into basements of the priciest lots. I passed Karen's house, a monstrosity of white columns and faux brick perched at the ridge's top, and saw her standing inside the massive picture window, phone clamped to her ear, gesturing wildly. I could almost hear her blaming the weather, bad luck, anyone but herself. Across the development, neon-vested crews scrambled to set up sandbags and dig emergency trenches. But their backhoes only made the flooding worse. They moved dirt here, shoved water there, trying to outmaneuver the rising tide with plastic barriers and desperate prayers. It was almost beautiful in a terrible way, like watching a sandcastle crumble beneath an incoming tide. That was only the first storm. The second came 3 days later, colder, meaner, roaring out of the mountains with a rage that felt almost personal. I felt the pressure shift before I saw the clouds, a heaviness in the air that made my skin prickle. The dam, already cracked and weary, groaned under the added weight of a week's rainwater. Minor leaks widened into muddy scars, small breaches no bigger than a man's fist spat water down the hillside, then another, then another. I didn't need fancy monitors to know what was coming. I had my grandfather's instincts, and they screamed. I stood on the highest ridge, wind whipping rain into my face, watching as the dam gave its last ragged sigh. The earth trembled under my boots, a deep gut punch rumble, and then, with a roar that shook the valley, the dam burst. Not all at once, not a cinematic explosion, but a slow, brutal collapse. Tons of trapped, furious water tore through the breach, pouring down the mountainside. The force shredded trees like matchsticks. The water took the path of least resistance, the path it had always taken before man tried to tame it. That path led straight to Willow Ridge. In seconds, the first row of homes, still draped with flags and patriotic bunting, were swallowed by a boiling wall of brown water. Roofs lifted like leaves, walls crumpled like wet cardboard, streets buckled and split open, swallowing minivans and mailboxes alike. Power lines snapped and danced wildly, hissing and sparking against the flood. Karen's house, the gleaming temple to hubris, stood firm a moment longer. I saw her on the porch, screaming into her phone, frozen in the headlights of disaster. The water reached her foundation, hesitated like a predator savoring its moment, then surged. The ground beneath her perfect lawn liquefied. The house shuddered, leaned drunkenly to one side, and with an awful groan, cracked cleanly in half. One side slid down into the churning flood, the other collapsed backward in a slow, almost graceful bow. The massive white columns snapped like toothpicks. It was over in minutes. Emergency crews came, too late, always too late, wading through knee-deep water, radios crackling, faces blank with disbelief. They shouted orders, strung caution tape that sagged uselessly in the rain, tried to triage the chaos. But the mountain didn't care about their protocols. Water doesn't listen to sirens. I watched from a distance, dry and calm, my heart thudding slow and steady. Part of me wanted to feel guilty. Another part, a much louder part, felt only grim satisfaction. I had tried to warn them months ago, before the bulldozers, before Karen's Range Rover tore through my grandfather's fields. I had filed official notices with the county, warning about the dam's compromised condition and the risks ahead. They tore into the land like it was theirs to destroy, tearing open wounds that would fester come the first heavy rains. I wanted to scream. I wanted to charge down the hill and throw my body between them and the bones of my grandfather's work. But I didn't. I clenched my fists so hard my nails bit into my palms, and I stayed hidden. By then, I understood something they never would: they didn't just disrespect the land. They didn't even understand it. In their minds, they had won. They had legal papers, smug signatures, politicians in their pockets. To them, I was nothing more than a ghost clinging to the past, a relic of an old world no one cared about. They had no idea they were building their shiny new suburb on a ticking time bomb. Every broken stone, every severed route, every blocked runoff channel was quietly counting down to the moment the mountain would take back what was owed. They thought they beat me. They didn't realize they were living on borrowed time. So, I began preparing, not by fighting, but by stepping away. I stopped visiting the dam openly. I stopped patching minor leaks after storms. I stopped clearing intake channels that kept pressure from building behind the wall. I let the debris gather, the silt accumulate. I let nature simmer beneath the surface. I became invisible to them, a forgotten relic wandering the woods while they held barbecues on half-cured concrete patios and installed solar lights on streets that wouldn't exist in 6 months. The fall rains came early that year. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee as puddles formed on freshly sawed lawns. When winter melted into a soggy, chaotic spring, I took slow walks along the dam's edge. The cracks widened with every cold snap. The ground sagged where the backhoe had torn into the shoulder. I didn't cause the dam to fail, that would have been criminal. I just stopped protecting it. I let physics and hydrology, laws far older and more ruthless than any HOA charter, do what they always would. Their careful, expensive construction only sped up the inevitable. Storm drains choked with debris. Manicured lawns sloughing topsoil into clogged retention ponds. They rerouted waterways without realizing the mountain cared nothing for property lines or homeowners associations. It cared only about gravity, water pressure, and the truth that water always finds a way down. The first storms were warnings, minor sinkholes opening in unfinished sections. The HOA blamed unseasonal rains and ordered quick fixes. They held meetings about environmental stabilization and charged homeowners special assessments to cover costs, all while ignoring the thick tension beneath their feet. I watched in silence. I tended the scraps of land they hadn't bulldozed yet. I smiled politely at Karen at the gas station, listening to her smug updates about Willow Ridge's success. I said nothing about the fractures running through the bedrock below her feet. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance, honoring the land and my grandfather's work. The old truth, arrogance always pays back with interest. They had tampered with a sleeping giant. I didn't need to lift a finger to wake it. I just stepped back and waited. The rainy season came, and it was merciless. The first storm rolled in like a slow drumbeat, pounding the mountains until the rocks hummed with tension. I sat on my grandfather's porch, thermos of coffee in hand, watching the gray rain crawl across the valley. The mountains vanished behind mist. Far off, thunder rumbled low and deep. Below, in the subdivision, porch lights flickered on automatically, little yellow squares blinking against the gloom. I knew the land better than anyone. I knew how the clay would swell, how the shallow soil would slough and crack, how water would find its ancient channels again. I knew the dam, wounded and neglected, would not save them. As the rain poured for hours, I slipped on my old boots and wandered the perimeter of what had once been my fields. Even in the downpour, I saw it happening, jagged fissures splitting sidewalks, spiderweb cracks creeping along foundations of homes not yet occupied. Water pooled where drains hadn't been installed. It seeped into basements of the priciest lots. I passed Karen's house, a monstrous white-columned temple perched atop the ridge, and saw her inside, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. I could almost hear her blaming the weather, bad luck, anyone but herself. Construction crews scrambled, sandbagging, digging trenches. But their efforts only made the flooding worse. Dirt shoved here, water diverted there. It was like watching a sandcastle crumble beneath an incoming tide. And this was only the first storm. 3 days later, a colder, meaner storm roared out of the mountains, full of fury. I felt the pressure shift before the clouds appeared, a heaviness that made my skin prickle. The dam, already cracked and weary, groaned under the weight. Small leaks widened into muddy scars. A breach no bigger than a fist spat muddy water down the hillside. Then another. And another. I didn't need instruments. I had my grandfather's instincts, and they screamed. I stood on the highest ridge, rain whipped into my face, and watched the dam give one last ragged sigh. The earth trembled under my boots, a deep, gut-punch rumble, and then, with a roar that shook the valley, the dam burst. Not all at once. Not a cinematic explosion. A slow, brutal collapse. Tons of trapped water tore through the breach, pounding down the mountainside like a freight train. Trees shattered like matchsticks. The water took the path it had always taken, before man tried to tame it. That path led straight to Willow Ridge. In seconds, the first row of homes, still draped with patriotic bunting, were swallowed by a boiling wall of brown water. Roofs lifted like leaves. Walls crumpled like wet cardboard. Streets buckled, split open, swallowing minivans and mailboxes alike. Power lines snapped, sparking wildly. Karen's house, that gleaming temple to hubris, held for a moment longer. I saw her standing on the porch, screaming into her phone, frozen in the headlights of disaster. Then the water surged. The ground beneath her perfect lawn liquefied. The house groaned, leaned drunkenly to one side, and cracked clean in half. One side slid down into the flood, the other collapsed backward in a slow, painful bow. The massive white columns snapped like toothpicks. It was over in minutes. Emergency crews arrived too late, wading through knee-deep water, radios crackling, faces blank with disbelief. They shouted orders, strung caution tape that sagged uselessly in the rain, tried to triage the chaos. But the mountain didn't care about protocols. Water doesn't listen to sirens. I watched from a distance, dry and calm, my heart thudding slow and steady. Part of me wanted to feel guilty. But a louder part felt grim satisfaction. I had tried to warn them. Months before the bulldozers arrived, before Karen's Range Rover tore through my grandfather's fields, I filed official notices with the county, warnings about the dam's condition, about the risks of disturbing the land. I had the letters, emails, certified receipts, all time-stamped, notarized, safely tucked away. I was legally shielded. I had tried. They ignored me. Insurance adjusters descended like vultures once the skies cleared, walking the muddy ruins with grim expressions. Claims were filed. Claims were denied. Acts of God, the adjusters shrugged. Negligence, the lawyers whispered. Karen tried to sue everyone, the county, the developers, the contractors, even me. Nothing stuck. Their own surveys, approvals, and greed had undone them. The HOA, once powerful and smug, found itself drowning in lawsuits, from furious homeowners, bankrupt contractors, even state regulators investigating illegal land use. Karen became a cautionary tale, a punchline told over beers and backyard fences. Willow Ridge itself was condemned within 6 months, a ghost town half buried in mud and silence. A soggy monument to arrogance and forgetting that the land always wins. And me? I stayed quiet. I stayed patient. I watched weeds reclaim broken streets. Watched birds return to shattered rooftops. Watched creek beds carve new paths where sidewalks once stood. Nature had done what I could not, justice. The flood had barely finished carving its path when news vans arrived, satellite dishes blooming atop their vehicles, microphones clenched in desperate hands. I watched from the ridgeline as reporters slogged through mud,